closing time. One more call for alcohol, so finish your whiskey and beer. I know I want to take me home. You know, it was a couple episodes ago I decided to sing these intros, and we recorded these out of order, so I can't actually remember if last week's episode past Jimmy sang that one. But if he failed present Jimmy by not singing, I'm sorry, because I made a promise 2 Jimmys ago that I would sing to you, and if I failed, I'm sorry, but not today, guys. And why am I singing that song?
I'm sorry that they had to hear you sing that one.
Oh my. Because, Kelly, here we go. Hashtag segue. It is the closing episode of our summer Clearly season, where we have been engaging with themes around the book Purposefooled, which is out now. And we saved, I don't know if we saved the best for last because they've all been so amazing, but I loved interviewing this human being in a very special way.
We had conversations when we were first planning this season, and I told Jimmy, oh man, I would love to interview Zack Eswine.
Zack Eswine.
And he was like, just reach out to him and see if he'd have an interview with you. I was like, really? Because I read his commentary on Ecclesiastes. It was just pouring over it. Just there's so many things that I just really look up to
Insightful.
Him about. And he
said yes.
He said yes to an interview with us. So we were thrilled.
With him. And you know what else I love about Zack that I didn't get to appreciate in the actual episode? We both have pig-themed names. Eswine, need ham. I think, is there some kindredness going on? Were our forefathers, were they in the meat market together? I don't know. But I felt a kindredness when I was talking with them. And we
maybe
hope
you
do
will
too.
too.
So stick around for the Zack Eswine episode. Here we go.
Well, Zack, we're really grateful to have you here as a part of our podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes.
Zack Eswine is a pastor of Riverside Church for 15 years. That's in St. Louis, Missouri. Have you been to St. Louis, Missouri?
I have been to a Riverside, but not this
Not
Riverside.
that one.
So no, and I have been to St. Louis.
Okay.
But, yeah.
And founder of Sage Christianity with his wife, Jessica. And we're just glad to have him with us today. We've been so grateful for your ministry through your books. And writing is a hard work. I was going to ask you, since this summer, season of our podcast is really themed around a book I'm about to release, what do you think is the most challenging part of writing books? What has been the hardest part for you? Because you've released probably, 6?
Yeah. I think the hardest part is, you stare at a blank screen or a blank page, and then you start writing stuff down. And for a moment, you think, oh, this is good. This stirs my own heart. And then the next day you read it and you're like, oh, this stinks. This is why would anybody read this? And just the ebb and flow of coming back again and again to where our identity truly is, and trying to learn the joy of the craft, and that, and so I think that's the challenge of it.
Are you the guy who's like, man, I have this thing, my soul is on fire. I have to get this thing out. Tozer used to talk like that. Like, don't write a book until you're like, bones are on fire for it. Are you like, man, I should probably write a book this year. I'm just going to sit down and see what the Lord gives. Like, where on that spectrum are you?
Well, I came to writing sort of later. I started in my 30s, and I think at that time, I just thought of it as, I think I need to try to write this book. I'm in my 50s now, and so it feels more like, I gotta get this out of me onto the page. Yeah. So.
Well, one of my favorites that you've written is actually kind of a commentary of sorts on the book of Ecclesiastes called Recovering Eden, the Gospel According to Ecclesiastes.
She is a fan, man.
Yes.
We are, I'm trying to hold her back from fangirling a little bit in this interview because when she was, and here's the best part about a verbal processor like my wife, every book she reads, I read. because she's going to tell me about it at dinner.
Yay, that's wonderful. Yeah.
So what she meant to say is we both have read this book, and and it's wonderful.
Yeah. So I'm curious, why Ecclesiastes? Like, what was the impetus? Because it is what an interesting book in the scriptures that a lot of people don't know what to do with.
Real pick me up. Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
What drew you to this book of the Bible, and why do you like it?
I think it's my go-to book in the Bible. Probably because personally, there's a lot of wreckage in my life story, like a lot of us. There's and I find language for the things that go on in my heart there, and then pastorally, as a pastor these years, sometimes when people think of the Bible, they don't imagine a book like this,
Yeah.
that somebody would say, "I wish I had never been born," or "I looked into my heart and this is what I felt and this is what I saw and I didn't know what to do with it." And it seems like God's just trying to keep us busy. Like, what's this all about? And I think culturally, it might be the book in the Bible right now, at least where I'm located, with other than Christian people, that is an immediate resonance. Because to access the book, you don't have to know about the history of Israel in any depth kind of way.
That's a good point.
He sort of sets aside his credentials and then speaks to us like a human being. He just looks around at what he sees and what he experiences and says, "Do you see that? Do you experience that? Did you notice that? Isn't this what it feels like?" And so a lot of other than Christian friends who might be skeptical of lots of things, this book is a surprising help to them and refreshment. They can't believe it's in the Bible. So I think for those reasons, and to top it off, it's really a book about joy.
Yeah.
So he sneaks up on you with the invitation to joy, but it's not trite in any way. So I think that's why anybody who's been through stuff and feels maybe suspicious or cynical or broken in their life, it's hard to hear someone say, "Be joyful."
That's right.
But if someone steps into our shoes and we feel like we've been heard, we've been known, we've been seen, and they say, "You know what? Joy is still possible."
Yep.
Then we're able to hear them. And I think that's what that book does for us.
I love that. I do believe that it's a book about joy. After reading your book, but studying it myself, it's like, it's a different type of joy, a more sure and stable one that doesn't turn a blind eye to hard. And I think that's what, like you're saying, resonates with people. So I love that. That is one of the reasons that I wrote this book, Purposefooled, that's coming out here in a few weeks. And I read this in one of your other books, and it's one of the reasons I was like, oh, if we can get a conversation with Zack Eswine, I would just be thrilled. You said it in The Imperfect Pastor that you're talking to pastors, but I think it's all of us, that we feel a temptation to do large things famously as fast as possible. And I feel that, I see that. Well, there's all sorts of things that may drive that, but I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. Why do you think we all feel such a temptation to do that, or to be driven by that, to do big things famously as fast as possible? Yeah. Where does that impulse come from? Why is that so hard for us to avoid?
That's such a good question, and I can't wait to read your book on these things. Like, you know what? It starts in our hearts, and then it's incentivized in our culture. And so in our hearts, this is an old thing in Eden, right? The great temptation from the whisperer was that we could be like God. And so, we could know everything. We could be everywhere at once. We could do everything. We can fix it all. And so there's already this temptation in our heart that can make us ambitious to do a great thing in a famous way. And it can rival God. And so we already have that in our heart. But in our particular American culture, and maybe Western culture in some way, but certainly American culture, this is incentivized. On the one hand, it's efficient to do a large famous thing fast. So if you make socks for a living, your factory, you want your factory to be able to make the most amount with the least amount of money and trouble to make the biggest difference, And so any business operates on that kind of principle, and that makes all kinds of sense for a business. But when we're talking about a soul, a human being, when that gets transferred to our personal life and purpose, then it makes all kinds of mess in our life because we're not socks. And
that's my big takeaway so far from this
that's our
conversation.
hashtag. We're not socks.
We're not.
But if you think about it that way, our Lord Jesus isn't as interested in quantity as I often am, and he's not moving as fast as I want him to be. He doesn't seem very efficient in that sense.
Yeah.
If our soul, like someone once said, is like a wild animal that's nervous and just peeks out a little bit. He is a gentle, kind inviter, and he's willing to wait and to do what we need to do. And so he's not efficient relationally in that way. And so when we try to do a large thing, famous thing fast, our heart resonates with it, our culture incentivizes it, and so we attach it to God, and then we got to do a big thing fast for God in a famous way. And when that happens, we're trying to be everywhere at once, fix everything, and know it all, which means we're trying to be like God, and we just burn out. We wear out. And the freeing thing is we were never meant to fix everything, and never meant to know everything, and never meant to be everywhere at once. And the thing that God's doing in our soul, in our life, usually takes a while.
Yeah.
And he's not bored. He's not bored. I get bored with a flower. I think I've seen it, so I know what it is, or a star. I've seen it before. But as G.K. Chesterton once reminded us, what if God never gets bored with seeing the same flower over and over again? Maybe he makes all daisies alike, Chesterton said, because he never tires of them, and he has a fresh enjoyment every time he sees them. And then Chesterton said, maybe God is young, and we are the ones who've grown old. And so I think Ecclesiastes invites us to that. The way Jesus is human and inhabits human space in God's world, in the creatureliness which he took on himself, and says, look at a lily, look at a bird. He is that sage, the biblical sage. Look at the ant, look at the field. And from that, it's no waste of time to ponder it, to recognize it as a signal in God's world, and derive benefit from it. And so we sort of walk into the world with God's word, and we don't have to be bored anymore. And so I guess the final thought there is, if Adam and Eve, they're in the garden, and I don't know, they came home from a long day of gardening, and Adam said, Eve, I just got to get out of this place. I just feel like I was made for so much more, than just cultivating a garden and being together. And of course, that was the ancient whisper, that tempted them, because they already had a thing to do, a people to love, and a place to be with God. And that was enough. That was enough in God's eyes, but it's often not enough in our eyes. And there's the trouble we have. Yeah.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that feeling of I was made for more, or you talked about ambition earlier in a way that is like, that the roots of some of that is in the enemy of our souls, where those are often things very culturally glamorized, celebrated, affirmed in us to chase down. And I'm hearing from you maybe that we should feel a caution in ourselves at times when we feel that itch. I was made for more than this. Is that, am I hearing you right? And hearing that in what you're saying?
Yes. It's sort of like, what's the more and what's the this?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, because on the one hand, we were created for more. We're in once Eden. We're in fallen Eden. We're not where we were created to be, and we're not where we're going ultimately. And so, we do feel this ache, like Paul said, this deep ache, longing for our full redemption. And so in that sense, we were made for more, and we feel that. But sometimes we mean made for more, and we mean, I asked for daily bread and I got daily bread, but aren't I worth more than daily bread? Shouldn't I have a steak? You know, and it's more of a vocational status sense that I deserve more, or something. And at that point, we're just living in a rival story to the gospel. We've entered a different story and we've taken on being a character in that story, and it's a wisdom from below story rather than a wisdom from above story, and we're tempted at that point to become Demas, who once was a friend of Paul, but then loved this world.
Yeah.
And out of loving for that world, he let go of the treasure, the pearl of great price, and he took hold of something else. And so sometimes our ambition leads us that way, and when we feel we want more that way, that's trouble for us. So we're in that spot where Jesus said there's two kinds of treasures, these treasures from heaven which last and endure, and then these other kind that are temporary and don't. And so if I'm ambitious for the lasting thing, ambitious for the person who gives us everything good, I seek his kingdom first, then all these other things will be added. And so there's where we need wise counselors and help to discern our heart and to know our season and to ask that. So we should aspire to a great thing. We just want to make sure it's the way Jesus defines greatness.
That's right. That's right.
I
love everything you're saying, and I'm glad we're recording this because I'm going to make it my ringtone. But I'm curious, when I hear you speak like that, and I so resonate with this, and I personally resonate with it because I've wrestled so much with wanting more, and then there's a crucible moment or series of moments or decades of moments that have beat it out of me and helped me to see what God would have. And when I hear you say that, I just get really curious about what the crucible moments in your life were that brought you to this insight yourself. Was it simply just, I'm just munching on the word and there it is? Or in your life, were you also experiencing that tension where you had to have the Lord sort of help you overcome that vision of what the good life is?
Yeah, thank you for that. Good question. I think especially as an artist, you all know what it's like to try to grapple with these questions.
Yeah.
And for me, I would say I was an up and comer, and so I had preaching gifts, and folks had a vision for my life, and I can't wait to see you in 10 years, that kind of thing, and given platforms early, and but then there came a point, where I was sitting in a Schnucks grocery store, which is a local grocery store here. I received a call from a national Christian person who let me know that a book I wrote just won a national award, and inviting me to interviews. And but I was in that grocery store in a t-shirt and sweatpants, unshaven, my hair everywhere, getting milk and bread for my 3 kids, because I received that award at the same time that my wife of 15 years walked away from Jesus and went to find her own way in the world. And at that time, I became a single dad with primary care for my kids and our kids. And so, but the way the local Christian community that I was an up and comer in responded to that was a difficult one. And so the way I found myself with people no longer shaking my hand or patting me on the shoulder or having a vision for my life, I had people distancing themselves from me, and really being on the one hand somewhat alone, not able to access the community I normally would have. And then being a dad, learning how to, you can only go to McDonald's and Subway, McDonald's so many times, then you shift to Subway. But eventually you got to learn how to make a crock pot, use a crock pot, make food, brush your daughter's hair at night. Everybody worked through the screaming grief we're going through, and then having to take a long, hard look at myself. And so I remember one time, the dog came down the steps, and my little toddler came down the steps. I had laundry in a basket, and I was walking through the bathroom. It was in the basement, walking through the bathroom into this room, and my little guy spilled grape juice right on the floor, and then the dog threw up at the same time. And then I looked in the mirror and I saw myself unshaven in a mess holding laundry, and I just started to cry. I thought, what is my life? And of course, what my life was caring for children, walking through grief, which is its own vocation sometimes, taking a long look at my own self to see what needed to change in my life, and trying to provide some kind of stability for the instability that was going on with our kids. And I had to wrestle with, for the first time, if I don't have a position in ministry, do I still matter to God? Yeah. And that was hard fought for. And of course, you come to realize, yeah, you really do. And so that kind of a experience, there are others, but that's the big one. That's the crucible moment that changed my heart and my mind on some of these things, to see things in the scripture I probably had overlooked or I cared about, but I just didn't know what they meant in a deeper way.
Sure.
Yeah.
Man, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that will resonate with so many people, because I think that's some of the cultural tension that I sense in those that I meet with in my own life. Is there's this message of do more, whatever your dream is in your heart, you can do it. Kind of there's this encouragement to go chase down these big, large, famous things, and there's opportunities for it. But then behind the scenes, there's so many people who are feeling what you're feeling, whatever their unique set of circumstances are, whether it's the swelling tasks of home management and children, or grief and loss that really, I agree with you, is a vocation. And just kind of asking, how do I matter in all of this? And do I matter? And does my life matter if I'm not outputting things? Yeah. If I don't have anything to show for it, right? I don't have anything to post on Instagram. Am I changing anything? And does my life matter? I think those are the questions rumbling in so many hearts. There's not really a permission given to people to be present in those moments of the grape juice spilled, I'm carrying laundry, I'm at the grocery store. It doesn't seem to matter because of what's culturally celebrated. So how do we thrive in that moment? What truths? And I'm even thinking people who may be listening to this going, yeah, I'm there. Maybe they're listening to this conversation while they're cleaning up a mess on the floor. What truths do you tell yourself, or in that season became precious handlebars for you to cling to stabilize yourself with all of that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Isn't it like to believe that we have a thing to do, a place to be, and a people to love, and that's really with God what He delights in and loves. I think culturally, it's hard to delight in a tree. Or delight in an ordinary day playing blocks on the floor with your child, or delight in another day's work, or delight in making food. What's the point of all those things? You have to get beyond that. If you have food, it's got to be a platform to something else. And if you have a tree in your yard, how can you leverage it to make it something else? And so there's some kind of, like in the clergy world, we have this constant message that if you're in the congregation I serve, I have to get you on mission. And what that means is I have to get you to become someone other than who you are doing something other than what you're currently doing, somewhere other than where you currently live. Like I got to get you off of all that onto the thing called mission. But you know what? If you've just had a baby and your baby was born 6 weeks early, and you're having to be up every 2 to 3 hours on purpose to make sure the baby's feeding, like what does it mean to help that person be on mission? Or, if your wife of 45 years now has dementia and is moving into a dark space, and you're learning what it means to lose the one I've loved in a Christian way. Like, what does it mean for that person to be on mission? And so when mission gets defined as always something other than where I am, doing something other than what I'm doing, then every good gift that's right in front of us that God is not bored with and delights in, it doesn't count. It doesn't count. And so if you're a faithful mother and dad to the child born 6 weeks too early, that's just a delight to God. He's present. He's with you in the 2:30 in the morning when you're trying to find some old 1960s show. That's all that's on, and you're trying to just get through the night. That is enough. Why? Because that little child matters to God, and everything that God's created for a child to grow takes all these small, mostly overlooked things over a long period of time, and then entering the season of dying with one we love. As brutal as that is, He's given us resources that no one else has to give us to be able to enter small, mostly overlooked graces that bring redeeming moments to this situation and roots us in a deeper hope. And you don't have to move to Africa to do that, and you don't have to get 15% more followers on your social media. Like it's a sturdy, God-inhabited life you're living. And sometimes we can think that, I have to. Social media can really help us, right? It can rally us to something. So I'm not a curmudgeon about that. But that being said, sometimes we can think because we've posted, we've done something.
Yep.
Fake news.
And I think C.S. Lewis at the end of his book, The Four Loves, really caught me with this thought. He said, you know what? Now that we've written a book on love, and we've talked all about love, and we feel strongly about love, we can mistakenly believe we've actually loved when we haven't yet. We've just read a book on love. And so maybe it's like this. Anything that we're posting anything online is meant to lead back to offline, because that's where the real embodiment is. And that matters to God. He really... Otherwise, we forget that the idea that I can be whatever I want and do whatever I want, it often assumes economic advantage. Like I got to have a lot of advantages to be able to think that way. But if you have a chronic illness or a disability, or once you get to a certain age, or you're young, you're little, and you're 4 years old. Like, it excludes all of those people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so funny. I mean, you talk about that so much in your book. In fact, that's what was driving a lot of the impetus for your book, was going, man, we have people in our life. We have one of our dear mentors, about a decade or less now, got MS. And I was just reading a report on him today from his wife, and it's awful. And he's one of the godliest folks we know, and he has had such an impact in so many lives. And it's like, but now he can't really speak much anymore. He can't even read much anymore. His head's spinning. He's in so much. Has his purpose gone away because he's not a non-contributor? in the sense that we mean it as American. And there's so many folks in our life that I know for you, that's been a big motivation to go like, we have to have a definition for purpose that can include them.
Yes.
And I don't think culturally we do.
No.
Is I think a lot what's behind your book.
Yes.
Yep.
It's very much a position of privilege to be able to think that way. Like you said, it's to even have the option to dream about your life and consider what you might want to do and chase it down is like most of the world can't think that way and doesn't even have the opportunity to. And we unknowingly, I think, preach a message to those groups of people when we're celebrating certain aspects of this chase your dream thing. We mistakenly preach that their lives don't matter. We don't mean to, but I think that that's subtly happening. And I love what you just said earlier, that all of that has meaning because it's a sturdy, you said a sturdy God-inhabited life. And that's really my hope in this book that I just finished writing, is that people would see that your purpose is really not associated with what you do. Like our friend who spent years of his life preaching and teaching. And now the verbs of his life are receiving care and receiving help. It's like his verbs have changed dramatically. But purpose cannot be defined by verbs, but only by a great noun. My life is still God inhabited. And we hear him preach that when we text him or reach out. He is happy to say, I'm receiving the life that God has given me because God does as he pleases and I'm happy to be his. It's like, he lives a God inhabited life and that infuses life with meaning and purpose because God is in it. And that's so freeing. As we go through those shifts like you're talking about, there's so many unexpected twists and turns in our lives. And as they come, we're free to take those turns with God being the one who's providing that sense of meaning and purpose. I find it to be really freeing. It sounds like you do too. And, it reminds me a little bit of 1 Thessalonians 4, where, we've been talking a little bit about aspirations, Paul then tells us to aspire to something very unusual, to aspire to live quietly and mind your own affairs and work with your hands. It's like, get off social media, do less, and go garden. I don't know, work with your hands. It's like, that's what you should aim for, aspire. It's an interesting word to use the word aspire that way.
It sure is.
Yeah. So maybe just as I think about the person listening to this who's going, man, how do I change my aspirations? How do I aim to live for that? What encouragement could you give our listeners who might be caught up in the whirlwind of that busy moving toward burnout, and they have an eagerness to change directions, right? An eagerness to go, I want the better thing, but how do I get off the treadmill? How do I do that? Like what's some things you could encourage us with to fight for that?
Well, the first thing we could remember ourselves is who's Paul and who he's writing to, and that none of those folks spoke English. That's helpful to remember. And who he was writing to were minorities beneath an occupying majority power of Rome. And so they already did not have the privileges many of us have. And yet they can still aspire. They can be ambitious as followers of Jesus. So that's one thing. The second thing is it's in community. Aspire is a plural. I'm sure the Greek word there is plural. And it's a community endeavor. And so we're individuals thinking about how would I give myself to a quiet life, working with my hands. But it's a community effort. And so the people of God together then would talk like this, help each other think through this, collaborate in learning this wisdom that Paul's talking about and how they would live it out. So we would need each other. We would need others to help us because we'll go through for us, unlike them perhaps, some of us will go through a detox. We're so accustomed to be at a certain level that our adrenaline has to adjust, our all the physiological stuff, and learning not to be bored with things that bored us before, and learning to believe the person of the Lord is waiting for us right where we work with our hands and right there in the quiet, and that He can handle everyone's business. So I don't have to mind everybody's business. I can mind my own, just the way Peter had to learn
Yeah, that's
regarding
right.
John, there near the end of the Gospel of John. And then a final thought is, and the powerful thing is, this is where mission comes back into play, because make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, working with your hands, minding your own business, so that those who are outside, so that you relate to those who are outside in a way that's proper to them. And Paul uses that word, that Greek word for outsider, 5 times in his letters. And he doesn't mean it in a pejorative way. He just means those who aren't Christians. That there's something about reaching those who aren't Christians that calls for our way of life being distinctive in this capacity for quiet, being unbored with good work, and not having to know everyone's business, so that I have the energy to know what we're meant to be in this world, and to have the Lord with us in that. And some commentators have suggested that because they're a minority, they might, that make it your ambition to lead a quiet life might have more of an idea of keeping your head down. But there's debate about that. But the thing certainly is this: they were a minority. They were giving themselves to this quiet heart with good work in a place. They were recovering Eden. They were having a thing to do, a place to be, and a people to love with God. And not even the Roman Empire could stop that. And when folks who might have had false notions about Christians encountered their way of life, it would cause them to stop and reflect and think, oh, this isn't what I've heard about Christians. I'm actually encountering their life. How do they live this way? And so there's an invitation in community there to cultivating a kind of way of being in the world that is distinctively Christian. And I used to think of that when I was growing up. That meant I didn't watch certain movies or listen to certain songs, and that's a different discussion. And certainly it involves discernment about all those things. But what it was for Paul is that our way of doing a day with our work in our neighborhood with people was the distinctive thing, and that outsiders, other than Christian people, would encounter. And so there's a lot to think about there that's really freeing. But it does mean this detox of I'm bored with ordinary work. I don't know how to be quiet. I fidget. My mind is going. And if at the end of the day all I did was an ordinary day's work in an ordinary place with ordinary people, is that enough to matter? And so those things come into play, but that's why we need community. And that's why the Lord is with us in that. And that's, and Saul of Tarsus is the one saying that, like, wow, what an ambitious guy he was in all the wrong ways. Even if he could be changed and talk like this, we can be changed too. I think that's Paul's point about the grace shown to him. Yeah.
I love that. And what an encouragement that changing those aspirations, growing our capacity for quiet, for meeting with God in the ordinary, is actually a witness to the watching world. And God uses that to bring people into the fold. That I think that's a great encouragement, that this is not a throwing off of mission. It's actually an embracing of the mission. to allow our days to progress in such a way that when we encounter non-believers, that they would look at that, go, wow.
Yeah.
So I think that's such a great encouragement to leave people with, and challenges me as I think about leaving this conversation to go do more laundry, which is what's ahead of me, you know?
Yeah, I was thinking about, if you were a missionary in going to another country, or if you were thinking about adopting a child and doing a remarkable, big thing like that, when you get to where you're going as a missionary, you still have laundry and brushing your teeth and making food and living. And when we do a big thing of adopting or something like that, it brings us right back to daily ordinary things. And so the way of carrying out that big love and that big purpose is with Jesus in the ordinary, day after day. And he loves that. And we get to learn what is it he loves about that. And trust it and follow him.
One of my heroes is Fred Rogers. And this whole conversation, I'm just getting such Fred Rogers vibes from you, Zach, and that's a huge compliment that I'm trying to pay to you, because I do feel like that is such an aspiration for me as somebody who's wired very differently naturally than a man like that. I see that and I go, oh, that's a beautiful thing, and I so see that in you, man. And I'm so grateful for your heart and your contribution to Christian thought in this space, and how you're clearly modeling that in your family and with your church. It's a beautiful thing, and I love that. So thank you for that.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Thanks so much, Kelly. Really looking forward to this book, Kelly. I'm encouraged already today by the things you've shared, and I pray and trust it'll be a good help to many of us.
I hope you guys enjoyed that interview with Zach as much as we did. We both finished talking with him and looked at each other and just said how encouraged we were.
Oh, yeah.
And just excited. So super thankful for him. And you now can get Purposefooled. It's out. So if you've started reading it, would love to hear from you. Let us know what you think. And we hope that book is going to be an encouragement to you in your walk with the Lord. And then we're done with this is the end of our summer special bonus season. But we will be back for season 3 of Clearly this fall.
Special announcement. We're about to reveal the theme, guys. What are we doing in season 3? You've been aching to know, itching to know. You've got poison ivy to know what it is. Well, let me scratch that itch and tell you that this season we are going to be exploring and walking through the book of Job. Job. Old Testament book. Wonderfully complex book, difficult book, but you know us, guys. Throw us in to some difficulty. We're going to go there.
We've both been reading it, talking about it. I'm so excited.
So if you've had questions about it, we're going to be exploring themes like suffering. We're going to be exploring themes like God's purpose in it, his sovereignty over the hard in our life and the good. We're going to be talking about angels and demons and Satan and all kinds of crazy things. And I can't wait to get into it, because I think God has things for you in this book. And so we're going to explore it together with you.
Yeah. So in the coming weeks, you might pick up that book of the Bible and read it yourself and send us your questions. We'd love to hear what they are and kind of where your wrestle is with that book as we prepare. So you can send anything to us at question@clearlypodcast.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next season.